Welcome back to Transit Scheduling 101. In our last video, we talked about how to develop a runtime, and our example route was the 64 Raytown, serving Raytown, Missouri. In this installment, we're actually going to take this route and then develop it into a timetable. So we're going to use the runtime that we developed, sort of using the tools that we talked about, and actually build out a timetable. As we build out this timetable, we are intentionally going to do this in Excel because the theme throughout this whole series has been trying to make this accessible, because although we do have our scheduling softwares like Trapeze, like Hastis that can do this scheduling and really streamline the process, the reality is it's not accessible all the time. So if you don't have access to these softwares, you can still develop your own timetables pretty easily. We're going to be using Excel for this one. But first, let's just give a little bit of background about this potential route and then where it sits. So just brought it here into Google Earth so we can see the general overview of the route, but within context. So this is, the route serves Raytown, Missouri. It's a suburb of Kansas City. This yellow line is going to show all of the Kansas City city limits, and then we can actually see where the existing transit network is situated throughout Kansas City. So has reasonable coverage, but then if we zoom into Raytown, with the exception of this 550 express route, there is not much transit service that is serving Raytown directly. There's a longer story there. There used to be more transit service in this place, but for a handful of financial realities, beyond the Iris micro transit service that is presently serving it, there is limited fixed routes serving Raytown. And Raytown is one of the relatively significant suburbs of Kansas City on the Missouri side. So we're going to look at what it maybe would look like to explore a route that would fill this gap. And that is going to be the 64 Raytown. So then if we want to zoom in on the route itself, let's just sort of walk through where it goes. A bit of context. I grew up just outside of Raytown, so I have a lot of, and I'm back in this area fairly regularly, so I have a bit of personal knowledge with the place, which is sort of informing this. This is my pet project route, so take it as a grain of salt as we're going through it. But just sort of looking at the further eastern end of the route, we're going to start it at this Constantino's Apple Market. It's a grocery store chain here in Kansas City. But this area, there's a thrift store, there's a whole bunch of different shops, plenty of space to lay over a bus without incident. And it's a just a nice destination, a nice end cap, because this area is pretty residential, as you can see. But the route will start at this Constantino's Apple Market, the grocery store, and once it takes off, it is going to head west down 63rd Street. Going to be pretty residential for a while, but eventually we're going to hit what is sort of historic downtown Raytown. So we have some more shopping centers, we have some old businesses, that sort of thing, but a little bit of commercial, but not a whole lot going on. As we continue moving west along the route, we're going to hit our next time point. That is going to be this Price Chopper. So this Price Chopper, another shopping center here in Kansas City. And this time point was chosen intentionally because it actually intersects with a few routes. If we turn on the existing transit service, the Blue Ridge goes up and down Blue Ridge, and then the 63rd Street continues into Kansas City. So putting a time point here just allows a nice place to transfer to the other routes. And then if we want to drop into Street View really quickly, we can see the road here is, and that's going to be a theme throughout the entire route, pretty big road, pretty sizable road. So that's why if you're looking at the alignment, as we're heading west, we keep the vehicle just on the road because you're already facing the shopping center. People can walk and go, but I think it'd be kind of rough to expect people to get off on this side of the road and then walk to the Price Chopper. So when the route is coming back towards the Constantino's, diverse into the Price Chopper. The choice that I made is not a choice that you have to make. Kind of depends on the timing, the overall pedestrian condition. But as you're just designing a route, these are the sort of decisions that you have to make on the fly. And then as you operate the route, you can say, hey, this is working, this is not working, and adjust it. But I thought it'd be best to keep this route coming in this direction into the Price Chopper just to make the connections safer for people. But once we continue down 63rd Street, we're going to hop on US 350. It is a major sort of highway that kind of serves as the major thoroughfare through Raytown. So we're going to hop on 350. Again, it's a divided highway, so the pedestrian accommodation is going to be a little bit hostile. If this route sort of does continue and is deemed successful, it may be worthwhile to actually upgrade the built environment. But again, all we can do is draw lines for now. So we're going to make our way through Raytown. As we make our way down 350, you're going to start to see a bit more commercial pop up. And then we're going to hit our next time point. It's going to be this Hy-Vee grocery store. So Hy-Vee, another grocery store chain, and did a similar thing that I did for the Price Chopper. I'm heading back towards the initial grocery store on the route, then you're on the correct side of the road so people can get off, safely access the Hy-Vee grocery store. But then when we're heading this way, sort of down 350, don't want to, again, force people to cross this divided highway. So we divert the bus into the parking lot just to make the condition a little bit safer. But this is our next time point, this Hy-Vee grocery store. Hop back out on 350, heading out. And then our next time point is going to be this Walmart. So, funny, I actually had an old boss when I was early in my transit planning career and said, sometimes route planning is just connecting the Walmarts. And that is kind of what's going on here. If you look in the Walmart though, you'll notice I have the routing kind of wacky. So because this is the divided highway, it's a couplet, our options are interesting. So if we were to actually sort of operate this route, we would probably try to establish something a bit more formalized. But for now, it's just a little bit wacky. We'll straighten it out if we need to, but next time point is Walmart. And then if we continue going down the road, we're going to terminate this route at the Raytown South High School, one of the major high schools here in Raytown, Missouri, before turning back around and heading back the way we came. So that is a quick overview of the route itself, the 64 Raytown that we are going to be building a timetable for in Excel. So now that we know the general lay of the land, we know the distances between the time points along the route, we are going to want to actually figure out how long it takes. So I mentioned in the runtime article, there are a whole lot of ways that you can develop a runtime. The approach that we are going to use for this one is we are going to use Google Maps. So we're going to look at the distances between these and see in general how much time it takes for any vehicle to get between these time points, and then add in a bit of extra time because buses have to stop to pick up people, whereas cars don't. So to do that, we are going to jump over to our Excel sheet, and I will include this Excel sheet as a downloadable if you want to explore it more, just to better understand it. But yeah, so this Excel sheet, pretty straightforward. Some underlying assumptions that we are going to use as we sort of design these routes. I'm going to assume a 1/4 mile stop spacing. I have one of my early articles talks about it. Kind of the emerging industry best practice. I will say, given the sort of land use and given the built environment that this route operates under, that may need some fluctuation, but for now we'll just keep it simple. So we're going to have 1/4 mile spacing. We're going to assume each time the bus stops, it's going to take 20 seconds, and then it's going to stop at about half the stops. Again, these are all assumptions. If you have a lot of activity centers along the route, probably going to stop at a whole lot more, but we're just going to stick with these assumptions to keep this assignment relatively straightforward, just because we're trying to demonstrate the concept more than anything. But from that, we can see to get from the Constantinos to the Price Chopper, it is just over 2 miles. At a 1/4 mile, rounding up, that's going to be 9 stops. And with that 20-second, stopping at half of the stops, we are going to say it's going to be 2 minutes that's going to be added to your runtime coming through here. Repeated that process all throughout. To figure out the actual run times, we use Google Maps. So then if you see down here, I have for the various time periods, this is the time to get from the start of the route to that Price Chopper, and I have 5 to 7 minutes. So how did I get that 5 to 7 minutes? If we jump up to Google Maps, 5 in the morning is where we're going to start. So if we go and change our depart time here and we'll set it to 5 a.m. and we will set it to a Wednesday. I'm just going to set it to the next upcoming Wednesday. So it's about 5 minutes to get here, but then as we go through the day, Google will tell you broadly how long it takes. So 4 to 6 is what it's looking like, 4 to 7. And again, these numbers are going to fluctuate over time. So this is just a jumping off point. But 4 to 7 is what I have here. If we go to the Excel sheet, I actually ended up putting it at 5 to 7. And the reason that I probably did that is I first looked this up at a slightly different time. So Google probably got some new information and updated. But again, this is just your first attempt at a runtime. So not the end of the world. So we get our ranges. And then from those ranges, we can get our actual travel time for our different time periods. The way that we got that is I just took the average of the range and then I added the appropriate amount of time for the stops. So we know 2 minutes for stopping for this price chopper. So it is the 6 plus 2 got us to this 8. And then we repeat that for the entire route to get our entire runtime table that's going to steer in both directions, how long it takes to get from each of these time points at each time of day. And with that information, before we build the timetable, I think it's always important to go back to our scheduling math. So this tab sets all of that up. It tells us, so I'll just sort of walk us through. This is going to be the same calculation for each time period. But in the morning, we know our round trip running time is 50 minutes. That comes from here. So we know it took us 26 minutes outbound, 24 minutes inbound. Add those together and you get to your 50-minute runtime. So we know it's going to take 50 minutes. We want our 15% layover as our rule. Again, that's the rule that I like to use when I'm assigning layover to a route. There's a whole lot of different rules. It's just the one that makes the most sense to me as a minimum, because more than likely you're going to be going over that. But if we know that, then we take our runtime plus that 15%. We see that in the very early morning, it takes us about 57 minutes to complete a round trip on this route at minimum. Because of the frequency that we're going to operate at, that's going to have to result in a 60-minute cycle time. And with that, we have 2 minutes beyond that existing layover. So this sort of tells us in a broad way how many vehicles we should be expecting to operate this route. And I always think this is a super handy tool to do beforehand, because before you get into the sort of nitty-gritty work of actually building the schedule itself, it's good to sort of understand this. So right now, we can probably be sort of astute observer, can notice a bit of probably going to be a challenge. So if we want to run this route at 60 minutes, because all of these run times in the midday and for the bulk of the travel day actually extend just beyond that, we're going to have some issues, because remember back to our cycle times, your frequency is what determines your overall cycle time. So even though it takes 62 minutes, if we're going to run this every 60 minutes, it's actually going to take 120 minutes, meaning about an hour of time is going to be spent with the bus just hanging out. That is not really what we're looking for, because even we can see our actual layover percentages over 100%, a lot of downtime in the route. So at this moment, we actually have a few choices, and it's good that we caught this before we built the schedule itself. So how do we resolve this? Because obviously, we don't want the bus just sitting for half the time that it's out there. So you got a few options. The one that we're going to explore further on is we're going to extend this route so we can, if it's going to have to take 120 minutes regardless, might as well do something with that 120 minutes. But also at this moment, it may be worthwhile to revisit your run times. Again, this is just our first pass, and it was probably a conservative run time. So if we have some institutional knowledge, we think the routes will probably run faster, maybe revisit that. And if we can get these under 60, then we're golden. The route actually cycles pretty nicely. But again, only do that if you actually believe the travel time is a little slower than it actually is. We don't want to just say, okay, we're going to make this 60 minutes because that only leaves 6 minutes of recovery. We can say the route is going to take 60 minutes, but when the bus driver gets there, it's going to take more than that, more than likely. Then the bus is going to run late, and we're not creating good transit in that situation. So we can revisit these run times if we think maybe they're a little slow. And then another option is to increase that midday frequency. So right now, this route is going to take between 1 and 2 buses, depending on the time of the day, and it's going to have a whole lot of just extra time. But we want to say, because this is all sort of driven by that cycle time, if we try a lower frequency, we can bring down that cycle time. So let's actually say we want to run this route every 30 minutes instead. So if we bring this down to every 30 minutes, we actually brought down that layover a bit. So we're not sitting for quite as much time, although we are sitting for still a bit of time. But we've increased the vehicle counts. The vehicles actually, we need 2 to 3 vehicles to operate this route, depending on the time of day. So this is still a lot of extra layover. Can we do something else? Can we get more frequency just to make the buses spend more of their time actually getting somewhere? So we're going to really send it, and we're going to run this route every 15 minutes. And if we move it up to 15 minutes, we actually notice, since the cycle time comes down to 75 minutes instead of the 120 that it was at 60 minutes, and then the 90 minutes that it was at a 30-minute frequency, we actually have a pretty efficient service, all things considered. We have a bit of extra layover in some of the time periods, but I would call this good. It was still a little spongy, but you got to run the routes as you run them. If we really wanted to continue squeezing this down, I would say we could bring it down to like a 10-minute frequency, but then that's going to present an issue here because at 10 minutes, our cycle is going to be 70. So we'll jump a bus here. But again, you can play with your frequency if you want to revisit the article on scheduling math. It'll actually really drive in how some of this works. But yeah, this is the option that we would take. We wanted to change the frequencies of the route. But we are going to actually extend this route. So since we're going to take it back up to 60 minutes, and since we have all this extra time at 60 minutes, we are going to say, okay, you know what? Let's see where else we can get this vehicle to go. Because the nice part about that is if we maintain that 60 minutes, for the same vehicle count, we can just cover a lot more ground, get people a bit further than they wanted to go. So how are we going to extend this route? We want to go back to Google Earth. We are actually going to take it a little bit further out. So instead of turning around after Raytown South, we're going to keep heading down 350. And as we go through here, you can kind of just see through the land use. Not a lot going on, so we really should be able to move pretty quickly through here. There's a few stoplights, but for the most part, we are going to be cooking until we get down to here, and we are going to hop off at Unity Village. So Unity Village, this is actually a, if I'm not mistaken, a monastery in Kansas City. But it's, I'll double check to see what it actually is. Let me actually pause the video. I'm actually not entirely sure what to call it, but it's a religious facility. Here's the Wikipedia page if you really want to dive into the rabbit hole, because it seems pretty unique, but Unity Village is an outpost of the Unity Church. We're going to hop off of the route at Unity Village, and then we're going to make our way through some of these shopping centers. So we're going to hook down through here, go past Summit Fair, all of this shopping center. There are actually some government facilities over here. And then we'll turn it around at the Summit Woods Shopping Center. It has a Target. It has just a bunch of shopping destinations. And then if we really had some extra time, if we really wanted to, there's an apartment complex popping up right here. So maybe we could even extend it over here. But for now, we'll just turn it around in the shopping center. But that is how we are going to extend this route. And let's see what that extension looks like from a scheduling standpoint. So we'll jump back to our spreadsheet. And then we're going to look at our detailed runtimes for this one. Same sort of practice, except we've added in the Summit Woods Crossing, and we're going to get our new runtimes. From these new runtimes, we can actually see how many vehicles that it's going to take now. So now, remember, if you recall when we first operated the route, it took 1 to 2 vehicles. Now we have it 2 vehicles all day long at 60-minute frequency. And with those 2 vehicles, we're actually covered a lot more ground. We're making sure that the bus is staying more efficient in the early morning and the night. It's going to have a bit of extra time, which is actually not incredibly atypical. But our recovery, our layover percentages are looking pretty decent, and we're only going to take 2 vehicles to operate this route. If we want to, we can see what it's going to look like at 30 minutes, and we have a lot of the same sort of recovery, still looking decent, but we're going to up it to 4 vehicles. If we decide we want to operate this route every 15 minutes, it's going to be between 7 and 8 vehicles, just because we can really split the cycle times. But yeah, we're going to first just start off with this information, with this sort of base scheduling math. We're going to build our timetable for it. And again, we're going to build that in Excel. And if we do this, we should expect it to take 2 vehicles. So we'll jump to here. This is going to be our finished product if you want to see what it looks like at the end. But we're going to start here basically in Excel. So as you're building schedules, the best thing I can say is it's more of an art than a science sometimes. So as I'm building it, I really like to try to start with one side and then I'll build the other one. So we're going to run this route hourly. I'll just type it over here for us to remember. Every 60 minutes. Every 60 minutes. Promise I can type most of the time. And we're going to run this route from let's say 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. No real reason for that. The only thing that I would advise as you are sort of developing your spans, aim for about a 16-hour span, just because that makes it easier to split it into 2 8-hour pieces of work as we're actually assigning this to drivers down the line. But again, there's a whole lot of ways to do it. So we're going to run this thing every 5 minutes. And we're going to run this route every 60 minutes for our first schedule. So starting at 5 a.m. This is actually where I like to use the time functions. So if you are not familiar with the Excel time functions, we can jump to it actually. And I'll leave a link for them. They're pretty straightforward, but whenever you're dealing with time in Excel, it's much easier and much more precise to do it this way instead of typing out the times. So we're going to start it at 5 a.m. So it would be equals time. And then the general structure of this function, it takes 3 entries. So one for your hour, one for your minute, and one for your second. So our hour will be 5, our minute will be 0, our second will be 0. And that'll give us 5 a.m. And from that, we actually can fill in these timetables. So this is a formula you can really dive in if you want to get into it, but it's much less complicated than it sounds. All it does is it looks at the time, the time before it, and then it says, okay, Constantino's the Apple Market, that takes 8 minutes in the AM peak. The AM peak, knows that because we're at 5 a.m. So it just takes that and then adds the 8 minutes. As you are doing that, again, use your time function. So instead of, and we'll see it like as we're going here. So we want to make this 60 minutes. So we will do the one above it plus that time function. And then to add an hour, we can either do 1 for your hour, 0, 0, or we could do 0, 60 minutes, 0. Both of those will yield the same approach. But then we have our next time period. So we're just going to click and drag this all the way down to the end until we get to 10 p.m. because I'm already starting from an existing one. I already knew where we're going to land. But we have that, and then from there, it's just copy and pasting. So this price chopper, we know that it's going to take 8 minutes, but then as you go on throughout the day, this is actually set up so it's going to factor in your time period. So as we get to 7 a.m., we're actually getting into the next time band. And in the next time band, if we go to our detailed running times, we'll notice the runtime actually goes up. So it takes 9 minutes for a lot of the day, but 8 minutes sort of on those edges. We're just reflecting that, and then we're going to see that all the way through. So we'll click and drag all of these down. And again, I'll include this spreadsheet because it's probably easier to poke through it by yourself just to see how it works. But from that, we actually have our outbound timetable. We can see our timetable getting from the Apple Market to the Summit Woods. And that is, for the most part, built. Next step is to build the inbound one that is going to pair with it. So this is where those service planning stats can really become helpful, because we got to figure out, we're going to do the same thing, but in the other direction. But I always try to start my trips at a kind of a logical spot that makes sense. So then if we go to our service planning stats, we see that our total available layover for this route is going to be about 40 minutes. So that with the layovers, I generally try to split them about 50-50 down the middle. So if we have 40 minutes, that means 40 minutes at our sort of longest gap. That means that we're probably going to want to have these buses spaced out every 20 minutes. So, excuse me. We probably are going to want to make our layover about 20 minutes right here, and then the other 20 minutes to shake out on the end. So 5:40, if we want to get to that 20, we will get to 6 a.m. So I'll just show you, because you can do this other ways. If you wanted to just type 6 a.m. this way, you can also just do it like that, and Excel can recognize that as well. But now we have our layover that's kind of as we expected, and we're going to repeat the pattern. So we want to go running this thing hourly. So plus time 0, 60, 0. And then we can get our time periods. This formula works the same as the other one. It just looks at the time before it to see what time period we're in, and then it looks at the time point to see how much time you need to add to get from this time point to the next one. But we will drag this down and then drag this all the way down. We'll also drag down our layover calculation just to see how much layover we're having between each of the routes. And then we've actually built our schedule. And then if we want to make a quick sort of sanity check to figure out sort of how have we built this thing correctly, because remember from our service stats, we were expecting this route to require 2 vehicles. So let's just do that. So we're going to follow this one through. I'm going to go ahead and color code it green just for the sake of telling which one is which. We follow this route through. In a public-facing timetable, these won't always line up. I always find it helpful to line these up because just the sort of, as we're sort of developing these. So 5:40 to 6. As we get here, 6:43. So when is our next available trip at Constantino's? That is going to be our 7 a.m. So our 7 a.m. right here is going to be green. Follow this through, 7:44. It's going to jump over to this 8 because it's the next available one. 8:49, so this 8:49, what's that going to line up with? Our 9 o'clock. And then you'll probably notice a pattern is going to emerge here. So we'll jump to this next one, 6 a.m. So 6 a.m., follow it through 6:43. It's going to become our 7. I'll make this a color too. Let's try purple. There's no rhyme or reason to these colors. But 7:49 is the end of this one. 7:49 is going to become our 8 o'clock. So then that's our 8 o'clock. And then if we were to repeat this pattern through, you're going to notice these 2 colors are going to alternate because these align with each of the vehicles that are going to be operating on the route. So with that, we have built our schedule for operating this route every 60 minutes. And per our service planning stats, it actually is lining up. We expect it to require 2 vehicles, and we are having 2 vehicles. Our layovers are about what we expected. So if we're looking at this, we should see somewhere between like 10 and what's 27 divided by 2? Like, I'm not going to pretend I know how to do math. 27 divided by 2? About 14 minutes. So we should expect layovers anywhere between 10 and 14 minutes, depending on the time of day. And it's going to get higher on those fringes. So then if we look at that timetable, that's about where we're at. It's going to get bigger near the end, and it's going to stay right in that range. So this route actually performed exactly how we expected it based on our service stats. And that's why it's super important to do these service planning stats, in my opinion, before you even develop the schedule. So now we're going to take this same schedule. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. And we're going to operate this thing every 30 minutes now. So every 30 minutes, same span. And we can actually use this same template here. So instead of adding 60 minutes each time, we're going to add 30 minutes each time. And this is going to stretch our schedule out because we're still going to try to get it to 10 o'clock. So keep dragging. 9:30, 10. Drag it all the way down here. And we are going to do the same thing over here. So instead of adding 60 minutes, we are going to add 30 minutes. Drag it all the way down. Notice my layovers are getting less ridiculous as the frequency is catching up with itself. And again, we're still seeing that pattern that we expected. It's just now happening every 30 minutes instead of every 60 minutes. And just like that, we have our service that is running every 30 minutes instead. And we can do the same sort of sanity check. So then if we go to our service planning stats, extended, 30 minutes, we expected this route to take 4 vehicles. So if we want to just double check to make sure we are making it in those 4 vehicles, follow it through. We'll start with green again. 5 o'clock, 5:40. It's going to jump to our 6. 6 o'clock, 6:43. This is going to have to connect to the 7 o'clock bus. So if we connect it to the 7 o'clock bus, 5:30, follow it through. 7:19 is probably going to be the 7:30 bus. And lo and behold, here it goes. We connect with the 7:30 bus. Going to follow the 6 a.m. one through. So the 6 a.m. one gets to the end at 7:49. That is a big surprise. Probably going to connect to the 8 o'clock bus. We get there, and look, we have connected to the 8 o'clock bus. Follow this 6:30. And it gets to the back to the end at 8:19. That's probably going to become the 8:30 bus. So we get our 8:30 bus right here. And if you'll notice, our pattern is repeating now. So since it is repeating, we know we're at our bus limit. We're at the expected bus count, and that is 4 buses. And the nice part about this is you can do it any way that you want to do it. So now we're going to do it one more time where we're going to decide, if we go to our service planning stats, we actually want to run this route 60 minutes in the midday and then 30 minutes in the I'm sorry, 60 minutes in the off peaks and then 30 minutes during the peak. So if we do that right, we should expect it to have 2 buses, between 2 and 4 buses, depending on how it operates. And I will say this one just because it gets to be a little involved. I did this one beforehand. I'll leave that as a challenge exercise for you, though, if you want to actually follow through the work. But if we look at our extended route that's going every 30 to 60 minutes, we'll notice the same thing. So we are going to go and follow through these routes. First, let's just look at it. So 5, 6, and then from 6 to 9, we're going to jump to 30-minute service. So we see there's a bus every 30 minutes. Back to hourly service in the midday, 30-minute service in the peak again. And then as we were doing this, we were expecting it to be 2 buses. So we're expecting 2 buses or 4 buses, depending on how much is going on. So let's follow this one through and then see how it goes. So we're going to start with this 5 a.m. This 5 a.m. bus catches the 6:43. The next one it's going to want to be is the 7 o'clock bus. And this one we're actually going to follow it all the way through, because what you're going to notice, since we do have that peak frequency, we're going to have buses pulling in the morning and then going back to the garage. We should have 2 buses do that in the morning and then 2 buses do that in the afternoon. So let's just follow the routes through for now. And then that'll be, after we get through this exercise, where we're going to wrap this one up. With 7 a.m. following our way through, 8:49 is going to want to connect to a 9 o'clock bus. And look, there is our 9 o'clock bus. So we follow the 9 o'clock bus all the way down. 10:48, that's going to want to connect to an 11 o'clock bus. So we connect to an 11 o'clock bus. And you'll probably notice this gap has gotten smaller. Astute observers will probably pick up why that gap is closing, but we'll keep following it through. So the 11 o'clock bus is going to make it at 12:48, so it's probably going to want to be a 1 o'clock bus connected to this 1 o'clock bus. This 1 o'clock bus, 2:48 is going to want to be a 3 o'clock bus, so we'll connect it here. 4:51 is going to want to be a 5 o'clock bus. Connect that one here. 6:49 is going to want to be a 7 o'clock bus, so we'll connect this one here. 8:47 is going to probably want to be a 9 o'clock bus, so we'll connect this one here. And then 10:44, the service is done. So this run is actually he's out of service. He's going home for the day. So we want to look at, and for the sake of simplicity, let's actually start at this 6 o'clock one right here. So we're going to follow this 6 o'clock one through. 6 o'clock, 7:49, that's going to want to be our 8 o'clock bus. So connect it to the 8 o'clock. And I guess maybe as I'm doing this, I'll sort of do this a bit more absently as I talk. The reason that I'm saying that it's connecting to that one is it's the next available trip. The 8:49, our next available option on this orange route, is going to be that 9 o'clock bus. It could not be the 8:30 because 8:30 is before 8:49. But continuing to follow through on this green one. So 9:52 a.m., that's probably going to be our 10 o'clock. 11:48, probably going to be our noon. 1:48, probably going to want to be a 2 o'clock bus. 3:50, it's going to want to be a 4 o'clock bus. 5:51, it's going to want to be a 6 o'clock bus. 7:49, it's going to want to be an 8 o'clock bus. Then 9:45, it would want to be a 10 o'clock bus, and it looks like we actually do have a 10 o'clock bus. So this is what this one is going to connect to. But now you're going to notice these gaps. So these gaps are going to be the extra buses that we needed from our service planning stats in the peak. You see, we need 2 buses for most of the day, but it goes up to 4 to support that 30-minute frequency in the peaks. So going back to the route itself, we'll start with this one. So this route, we'll still keep the colors over here for the sake of, we'll do it this way so we can see both of them. But this 6:30 bus, this is going to be a new bus that's going to be pulled out because in the hourly service, it didn't exist. We didn't have anything doing that. But this 6:30 is going to get there at 7:19. That's probably going to want to be a 7:30 bus. And lo and behold, we have a gap at 7:30. So we'll follow this one through. 9:21 is probably going to want to be a 9:30 bus. But then if we look, there isn't a 9:30 bus because we're back to hourly service. So this bus is a short block and it's out of service now. We're going to come here. Well, let's follow this one around. So we're going to use blue for this one. And again, these colors are just illustrated. There's not a right or a wrong color here. But follow the 6:31 all the way through to 8:19. That's going to want to be an 8:30 bus. And we have a gap for an 8:30 bus right here. So it's going to connect to this one. But then 9:14, that would probably, when our cadence, there's nothing for it to connect to. We're down to hourly service. So this bus is out of service again. And that is the purple one. And then the blue one are our 2 extra buses that are going to come in for just covering the AM peak period. So now we're going to look at the PM peak. So we'll start with this 3:30. And I'm actually going to use the same colors. So since this purple one is the earliest one, I'll give it the earliest block that's going to start right here. And we will put that in that same shade of purple, if I find that same shade of purple. 3:30, follow this one through, 4:20, that's going to want to be a 4:30 bus, more than likely. And we have a gap right here for our 430 bus. So 430 bus makes its way all the way through 621. 621 is going to want to be a 630 bus more than likely. But again, we're out of hourly service. So that's actually going to be the end of this run. This bus is going to make its way back to the garage. And we'll jump up to this one using that same shade of blue. And instead of fishing for the colors, I'll just do it this way this time. This 330 bus is pulled out for the PM peak. It comes out at 330. Makes its way around 521. It's going to want to connect to a 530 option. So it connects there. And then it keeps going. It's going to want to connect to a 630 option here, but we're back to hourly service. So now this bus is out of service. And this is how we get to our 4 buses. So in the midday, we just have the orange and the green bus sort of alternating. But then in the peaks, both the AM and the PM peak, to meet that 30-minute service, we get to this purple bus and then this blue bus. And these are only going to be running for short periods of time. They're not going to be running all day. They're going to have a gap in the middle. It will result in what is called a split shift. And in our next video, we're going to talk about actually blocking these and turning these into operator runs. And we're going to learn why these split shifts are maybe something to avoid. If you want to maybe take a guess about why it is, imagine you're the bus driver. You come in to drive this bus at 6:30. You drive it until 6:30. You get off at 10. And then you're just hanging out until it's time for you to go back out at 3:30. Is that the day that you want to do? And that is where I will leave it. So this was how you build a timetable, and you can build these timetables in Excel. I think Excel is a great tool because it's nice and accessible. You can also do it in Google Sheets as well. And all of this, this Excel sheet, I will include again as a downloadable. But again, thank you for your interest in this topic. As an aside, as I've sort of done this series, I've been super pleasantly surprised to find that people actually care about transit scheduling this much. So y'all keep me excited to do this work. I'll be back in the next installment to talk about blocking, and we're going to do that in Excel as well. Thank y'all.